I'm going to go ahead and replace our driver's side front CV axle. It connects the front hub area to our transmission. Using our 22mm socket, let's loosen and remove our lug nuts. Go ahead and remove your wheel, set that aside. Go ahead and use a punch. You want to go into this little notch right here and open up this collapsed part of our spindle nut. Use a 35mm socket to remove our axle nut. Go ahead and spin that off. I want to go ahead and remove our brake caliper and bracket. There are two 19mm bolts, one here, one down below. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove those. We're going to start with our bottom one first. We'll go to the top one. You want to be prepared. This unit will drop down. It is kind of heavy. You don't want to add additional pressure to this hose. So you want to hold this in place when you remove that bolt. You want to grab one of your hanging hooks here for your brake caliper. I'm going to go ahead and hang this. And use our strut spring to support this. Just go ahead and grab your brake rotor, separate that. Now on your outer tie rod end here, there's going to be a cotter pin. I'm going to use a pair of pliers. I want to go ahead, straighten these little legs out here on the cotter pin. Go ahead and try to work this out. Using a 17mm socket, we're going to go ahead and loosen the nut on our outer tie rod. What I'm going to do is I'm going to thread this back on a few threads. And the reason for this is once we remove this outer tie rod, the nut is going to be used to capture the tie rod end. Now we're going to use our hammer. We're going to strike the side of the knuckle here. That should release our outer tie rod. I can go ahead and remove that nut, spin off the tie rod, and I'm just going to put the nut back on the outer tie rod. Now we want to pay attention to is our axle shaft here. It comes through the middle of our wheel hub. Now we tried to push on this here. That axle is stuck in the splines on our wheel hub. Not a major issue. You want to go ahead and use a punch. And we're going to work this until we can break this free. You can see it moving in. And there we go. That way there, when we remove the axle, it should slide out from the back side of the wheel hub without any issues. We're going to use a 24mm socket. We're going to go ahead and loosen both of our upper strut bolts here. Our nut is spinning, so simply going to go ahead and hold that. Let's go ahead and do the same to the bottom. Now on this ABS wire right here, there is a bracket. There's a 10mm bolt. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove that. I'm just going to throw that bolt back in here. At this point here, we're going to go ahead and separate our strut from our knuckle. Just going to go ahead and tap out our strut bolts. Pull that bolt. Now at this point here, our knuckle is separated. The only thing really holding it is our lower ball joint. I'm going to go ahead and give our axle a few bonks. Pop that through. I'm going to try and work this axle out from the back side. I'm going to use our pry bar and we're just going to get behind We're going to use our punch again and continue to knock that axle out. At this point, go ahead and flex that knuckle over, pull our axle off to the side. Now we want to go ahead and remove the axle from our transmission. Now we're going to use a pry bar and go up underneath the vehicle, and we're going to get right behind our CV axle and our transmission with our pry bar. And literally, we're just popping that out. Now you want to have a catch can underneath to go ahead and catch any transmission fluid that might be leaking out. All right, let's go ahead. We should have that disconnected from our trans, and go ahead and remove this. Now that we have our axle seal exposed here, you want to go ahead and inspect it. We do have some transmission fluid coming out, but I'm going to take a rag, run around the inside, and you want to feel for any deformities or any tears or anything like that in the seal. Our seal is in good condition. If yours is damaged in any manner, now's the time to replace it. We didn't have a leak before we pull the axle, we shouldn't have one after. We're going to install this part of the axle shaft into the transmission. Now this little snap ring on the inside here is going to require us to give us a little bit of pressure going in to snap it into place. So let's go ahead and line this up. And then we want to go ahead and give it a little push and snap. You'll actually hear it pop into place. Now, once you have your CV axle installed into the transmission, you want to check the gap right here. You want to make sure that CV axle is right up tight to the transmission. If it is pulled out a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, you're not fully seated yet, and you'll have to pop that into place. Now I'm going to apply some anti-seize compound to the splines here. Then we're going to go ahead and install the outboard part of our axle shaft into the backside of our wheel hub. When that slides in, I'm going to go ahead and line up our knuckle with the strut. At this point here, we can go ahead and install both knuckle to strut bolts. Let's go ahead and put the 2 nuts on here. I'm going to put some anti-seize on these bolts here. Let's go ahead and snug these down. Go ahead and loosen up our nut here. Put it into our bracket here for our ABS. Get that installed. Let's go ahead and tighten that down. Let's remove the nut off of our tie rod end here. Go ahead and line this up, pop that in, and get the nut started. Let's go ahead and install our axle spindle nut. Just go ahead and snug down our axle nut. We don't want to make this super tight. We just want to pretty much bottom that out and make it tight. Now let's go ahead and torque down our strut bolts here to 156 foot-pounds. We'll go ahead and put some anti-seize compound on the face of our hub here. This will prevent our rotor from sticking. Now, when installing your rotor, you want to make sure that if you have the screws to hold the rotor in place, that you put the rotor in the correct position so you can reinstall your hardware here. If you don't have those screws, it is not critical to the operation of your brakes. Now let's go ahead and remove our caliper hanger here. I want to go ahead and install our caliper. So get this lined up. Slide this over and in place. And once we have that lined up, let's go ahead and get our upper bolt started. And once we get this started a few threads, We'll go ahead and get the bottom one started. All right, let's go ahead and snug those down. Let's go ahead and torque these down to 100 foot-pounds. I'm going to go ahead and install a couple lug nuts here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the lug nuts here as a brace for our pry bar here. We're going to put this in here like that, and we're going to use the ground as leverage on the end here. Now we're going to go ahead and torque down this spindle nut here, or axle nut, to 242 foot-pounds. Now go ahead and remove our pry bar, and we'll remove our lug nuts. Now that we have our spindle nut torqued down, I'm going to go ahead and dimple the edge here right into that notch. So we're just going to use our little chisel tip. Just tap that in. Once that's dimpled in, that'll prevent that nut from coming back off, and you're all set. Go ahead and install your wheel. Go ahead and install your lug nuts. Once we get these installed, we're going to snug them up, and then we'll go ahead and torque them down. Let's go ahead and torque our lug nuts down to 95 foot-pounds.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.